Welcome to our May lecture with Rich Friedman, who really can kick Indiana Jones's butt. I actually Googled maps from Indiana Jones era, and these are just so far above. The presentation today will include numerous examples of several different types of digital data and how it can be used for identification, mapping, visualization of cultural resources. We'll be going through the different technologies, and I'm sure Rich will explain them all, the types of data he gets from them. For the last 35 years of his professional career, Rich has been working in computer information technology and archaeology. He's worked with the Navajo Nation, the National Park Service, the Solstice Project, Bureau of Land Management, NASA, and the Earth Data Analysis Center at the University of New Mexico. I first learned of Rich at a SAR lecture on the Solstice Project and was just blown away by all three members of the panel. Rich, I'm going to turn it over to you. Amaze and astound us, okay?
I don't know if I'll do that, but thank you, Barb.
Yes, you will.
So this will be going over, some of the newer digital technologies, mainly LiDAR and photogrammetry are the two that are going to be used a lot, but also how we can turn digital data from GIS into 3D data for visualization. And I'd be remiss not to mention John Stein, who I've worked with for many, many years, and no doubt I would not be here today if not here in present, but here in the lecture without John. And then of course, Robert Weiner, who has supported a lot of the work over the last couple of years, especially during the summers. He's working on his PhD on Chaco and roads. So a lot of the photogrammetric data I'll be showing, he was a co-conspirator on that and paid for what I like to call it gas money. And of course, Taft Blackhorse I've worked with for many years, and Anna Sofair with the Solstice Project as well, and several other contributors. And this is your first introduction to an image of LiDAR data. This actually is Yucca House up in Colorado. Throughout this presentation, of course, Chaco is, when we think of Chaco and resources, we think of Chaco Cultural National Historical Park, but I typically think of Chaco as this larger area, and a lot of what I'll be showing throughout this presentation will come from this larger area. We'll focus some on Chaco, but also on the larger area as well. A quick introduction to technobabble, or what some of the things are I'll be talking about. GIS is Geographic Information Systems. Think of that as computer-based mapping. The real difference between GIS and maybe some other forms of mapping is, of course, it's digital, and there's a database associated with each entity that you see on the screen. So that allows us to do both analysis and visualization of the data, where we can see what the database can tell us. And I use it a lot for generating 3D massing models of the different buildings. Remote sensing, that's a huge thing that I use. It sounds really, really technical, but you're doing it right now. It's literally a means of analyzing something without touching it. So you're reading this slide, you aren't touching it. So that's a form of remote sensing. GPS, global positioning systems, I don't really need to define what that is, other than, it's the satellite positioning system. And typically what we use is survey grade GPS, though not all the time. Usually that's what we use so that we can get within a centimeter or two of something's actual location on the Earth. And where that's really important is when you're dealing with Z data. Usually if you aren't using survey grade equipment, then your Z can be way off. And LiDAR is light detection and ranging. That's what it stands for. The easiest way to think of it is if you've used a laser rangefinder, maybe for determining the range, you know, to the green on a golf course, or maybe you're a archer or a hunter and you've used a laser rangefinder to determine range from one place to another, or you're into construction and you've used it there. This is like that, only on steroids, where you're literally ranging the distance from the sensor to the surface of the earth or an object thousands of times per second. So you can get a lot of measurements and a lot of data all at once. A lot of the newer data sources with LiDAR, typically if you're looking at airborne LiDAR, they're typically 1 kilometer squares, and quite often those 1 kilometer squares anymore will be between 6 and 9 million elevation points per square. So you get a lot of data from LiDAR. And structure from motion, that's a new photogrammetric technique that actually uses the motion of a camera, the camera's location, analyzing pixels on the photos to determine where the camera is in space, and then determining where the camera is in space, it can determine where the points are on each photo relative to each other in space. And on the right here, all the little blue rectangles are the approximation of the camera location, and this is the resultant 3D model from those cameras. So it's a really great way to generate 3D data. The downside to photogrammetric data versus LiDAR data is you can't see through. You don't actually see through the vegetation, but you can't get ranging through the spaces between the leaves and the branches and whatnot in vegetation where you can with LiDAR data. And this is old. This is going on 20 years old, but it gives you an idea of, again, this LiDAR or laser scanning data. So these are 3D points in space of Pueblo Bonito. This was done by Bohannon and Houston. They're an engineering firm. They have an office in Albuquerque, and it was their Albuquerque office that did this. And this, at the time, this scanner that they used to do this was about $250,000, which was quite a lot, but you could do a lot with it. Now you can get a scanner of better quality for under $50,000. So the prices have come way down. This is an example of using GIS with digital elevation models to create a 3D version of Pueblo Bonito. And why I like doing this is it helps people understand how big a site is. There's a 6-foot tall figure right there for scale, another one there. And it allows us to see what it may have looked like, you know, when it was in use. Of course, it wouldn't have all these funky colors out there, but this helps us understand the structure of the building and the massing of the building all at the same time. And in this case, we were able to recreate what the landscape may have looked like in Threatening Rock, which, if you've been out there, you know Threatening Rock fell onto or into Pueblo Bonito. There was a 1 foot elevation contour interval map done in the 1930s, and they actually put some of the information about Threatening Rock, which was still up at the time, on that map. So we were able to reconstruct Threatening Rock as it may have been. It's slightly off, but it's close to what it looked like before it fell. And here you can see the stairways up onto the mounds in front of Pueblo Bonito. Those were actually recorded in excavations. This is a real good way to understand the scale and how things relate to each other, where these sites, especially in Chaco Canyon, are so large, it's really hard to understand them at a human scale. So once we can put it into the digital environment, we can move it around and begin to interact with it in a way you can't in the real world. This is the original portion of Pueblo Bonito, which was curated throughout time, used throughout time for approximately, what, somewhere between 300 and 500 years. That's also where most of the really interesting things that were found in Pueblo Bonito came from. And that's, John Stein always likes to call that the Holy of Holies back there, where it's separated by that wing wall. And then this is an example again of what you can do with the laser scanning. This was done with that same laser scanner, a Cyrax scanner. At this time, in the early 2000s, the scanners did not come with any sort of camera on them. They were just 3D scanners, so you'd get points in space. So for this model, the contractor, Western Mapping, took photos, hundreds of photos of Casa Rinconada, had a color chart in each photo so they could exactly match the colors back to what they should be in the office, and then texture map the final model with those photos. And at that time, we were really limited on how many points or how many polygons a model could handle. So the model you see here is highly reduced in detail compared to what the actual data was, because you literally couldn't animate it with that many points. Now you could, within the addition of 64-bit systems. Almost all of them are 64-bit now. We can handle a lot larger data sets than we could 20 years ago. And this, once you get this 3D data in the computer, you can do things like cross sections, you can measure elevations, you can measure orientations, things that, well, cross sections you can't do so easily in the field, but the orientations, elevations, all that you can do in the field, but it tends to be fairly labor intensive, where if you get a model built, then you can do all that on the computer and do it much more efficiently. So software and equipment used, just go through this real quickly if somebody has interest. Global Mapper is what I use for most of the LiDAR work. Agisoft Metashape is what I use for most of the photogrammetric work. QGIS is the GIS I use. Manifold is another one I use. It's really good for creating the hill shaded models of the 3D data. Blender is what I use for a lot of the animation, 3D animation work. DJI Phantom 4 is the drone I use, although I've also used a Mavic Mini, a Spark, let's see, and a Mavic 2 Pro and several others, but that's the one I tend to use the most. That's my survey data, or my survey grade GPS. For other photogrammetric work, the aerial photography from a pole, I use a GoPro and a Canon PowerShot. Pretty inexpensive cameras, but they do a really good job. And then for the real gearheads, a laptop that's actually kind of like a desktop replacement, and 128 gigs of RAM is pretty important for dealing with these huge data sets. Some examples. This is, again, LiDAR or 3D points in space. This is a LiDAR image of Chaco. This is Peñasco Blanco. This is a photogrammetric image of Pueblo Bonito. This is aerial photogrammetry of a great house, Quinajoni. And then this is the setup I used to do the pole aerial photography. So you've got a camera mounted on the end of the pole. This happens to be 23-foot tall pole. And when I'm carrying it around, usually it would be in a holster that's sitting on my belt at my waist. So it would be about another 2.5 feet higher than what it is there. A lot of what I'll be showing is Chaco and roads, because the LiDAR and the photogrammetry works great for the Chaco and roads. I won't talk much about them, but other than, you know, this is kind of what they the different construction types were, and we need to have an idea of how they were built in order to figure out what they might look like over time. And this is using the first example, what it might look like over time. And if we know what it might look like over time, we know how to identify that in the field and what methods to use and how it might, the actual morphology of the road on the ground after time. But typically what we're looking for is something like this, or a linear swale. So this would be a linear trough running across the ground. Unless it's a causeway, then it's a linear bump running across the ground. What we know about them, there's a lot of things we know about them, but what we want to keep in mind for this presentation is this idea that roads are straight, and I think you'll see some really good examples of not straight roads, and that they were primarily Chaco period, or in the 1000s up to maybe 1115 was when they were built. And again, that's not really true. We'll see some examples of that, and we'll see how they link to other features as well. And we'll also see some pretty wide roads. So they go up to 28 meters wide so far that we've seen. So that's 80 feet wide. That's pretty serious width for a road. And they often appear to be discontinuous. They may not be, but they appear to be discontinuous. So how do we find them? Typically, we use low sun angle aerial photography, stereo aerial photography, or looking for them in the field. Now we can use multispectral imagery. That works fairly well, but GPS works really well looking for sheared scatters on the ground, and LiDAR and structure from motion are an outstanding tool. And again, looking at Penasco Blanco, so there's the Chacoan Road, Great Kiva, Penasco Blanco, and that's it compared to an aerial photo. So in this case, an aerial photo, you can see everything extremely well. That gives you an idea of what those features look like in each data set. Now we'll go to the east of Chaco, actually to an outlying part of the park, to Pueblo Bonito. And Pueblo Bonito, Anna Sofer and her work has shown that the building itself is aligned to the lunar minor. And we've got, as you can see it there, this road running across the landscape. It's heading to the northwest or southeast, depending on which way you're looking at it. And it was one of those things that's always been an enigma, because it didn't line with summer solstice, align with what summer solstice sunset should be at that location, or with the lunar major or lunar minor. And we often wondered what was going on. And this is that same road in LiDAR data. And there's the site itself. And we couldn't figure out what was going on. And a couple summers ago, Rob Weiner and Scott Ortman and I happened to be out there, literally happened to be out there on summer solstice sunset. And we were looking at a couple other things that I'd found that looked like they were alignments to summer solstice sunset. And just as the sun was going down, we all three kind of thought the same thing at the same time, I think. And Scott was the one who said it. He said, well, maybe we should go look at the road. So we went over and got in the road. And sure enough, you can see the vegetation alignment or change here. And it is aligned right on summer solstice sunset. So this is a case of where technology is great, but sometimes you just can't beat actually going out there in the field to see what's actually going on. Now we'll go to the west of the park, to Casa Cielo. This is a little video of what the building looks like. So this is the actual building itself. You can see what it looks like. Now we'll look at what the building looks like in an aerial photo. So this is your typical off the shelf aerial photography. It's satellite imagery, actually not aerial photography, of Casa Cielo. So you can see the walls, you can see the kiva, you can see it fairly well. Now we'll look at the map, that's what this looks like mapped out. However, if we put the map over the aerial photo, there's something going on that's odd. North is not north. North is up. It's actually not how it's oriented on this map. And that's actually a problem I see with a lot of maps. More often than not, the maps are not oriented properly. Usually not off this far. And this was just literally a case of getting north marked when they mapped it, but not showing. They had the line for north-south, but didn't have the arrow for which was north-south. You get back in the office, you're drawing it up, and you're going, oh, which way was it? Oh, it was this way, I think. So that's not I mean, it's a big error, but it's not, because you understand where it comes from. So now that's the building again in 0.6 meter, or a little over 1.5 foot resolution aerial photo. This is structure from motion photogrammetry. That's the same building. You can see it's a little bit clearer to see now. And this is actually 3 millimeter resolution. So in the previous image, every 0.6 meters, there was a pixel for it. And in this case, every 3 millimeters, there's a pixel. And this is what that does for you. You can see a lot of detail here that you can't see in the other. And you can use this not only to map walls, but if you want, you can map the individual masonry elements in each wall. So we can now look at the LiDAR data of the same site. This is LiDAR data from the BLM. It's 1 meter, nominal 1 meter posting. It's about 0.5 meter resolution on this digital elevation model. You can see the kiva again. You can kind of see the walls. Now we'll look at the structure from motion. There it is, using structure from motion, and this is a 1.4 centimeter digital elevation model. So a little bit difference there, a lot more detailed. And again, if we zoom in, not quite as detailed as the image, but you can still see the individual masonry elements in the walls, where things are. So it's really quite detailed and quite useful for analyzing the site. Now, if we go back and play the game of alignments, we can look at what the corner-to-corner alignment is on the housing of the Great Kiva, or what the alignment of the road is up here. And we can see they're really quite close to winter solstice. Something that if you look at a map that's been published that doesn't have things quite right, it's not going to look the same. And we can also now, since it is in a 3D environment, we can interact with it. We can move it around. So this is just the 3D model. And we can look at it, and there's a little section of the building. We call it an altar, for lack of a better term. And that corner of the building is actually truncated at that location, or the corner goes across. You can see those masonry building blocks. They are aligned across this corner. So that was truncated to allow for this little altar out here, which if you're standing at the edge of winter solstice sunrise, would come right off the corner of the building. So this allows us to interact with the building in ways we can't in the real world, because it's pretty tough to walk around on this structure or around the structure. And we can also, if we want, this is where this wall fell down. That's the wall with the masonry elements on edge, so we could map where those elements landed if we wanted. And some examples of tech in Chaco. This is King Quetzal. So this, I created this in 2016. The park wanted me to do several things for their new museum. They wanted 3D models of King Quetzal, Pueblo Alto, Chetro Ketl, Pueblo Bonito, and Pueblo del Arroyo. And they wanted to make a 3D model of Pueblo Bonito as it was in 1941 before Threatening Rock fell down. So this was a part of that. I started looking at the maps of King Quetzal And there are 3 different published versions. I didn't know which one was right, so I took the maps and went out to King Kletso to figure out what was going on, which one was right, and I found out that none of the maps were right. So in order to get an accurate model, I need a good map to build the model from. So this was kind of the precursor to what I was going to do for Bonito. That was to go out and photogrammetrically map the building. So in that video, all those points were just 3D points in space that were colored based on the pixel value of the photo it came from. So there's the final 3D model. So this is taking those points and generating a mesh or triangles between those points to create a 3D model. And from that 3D model, then we can create an orthophotograph that then we can use to map the building as it sits. And I also use survey grade GPS to georeference the 3D model. This is one of the published maps. And this is the final map. You can see it. There's a lot of differences. The main one is where north is. North is not that direction. North is this direction. But also, every map shows this as being a room. It's not a room. It's actually a little notch, which you see in McElmo masonry style buildings, which this is. Quite often, this little notch, which has often been interpreted to be a ladder notch where you'd put a ladder in. Usually these structures do not have doorways opening to the on the ground floor level. The way to get into them is through this little notch with a ladder. And this is the final. So I went through all that to generate this model, a little 6-foot tall person there. And then the data from that I generated here was used to 3D print models of King Kletso and of the other 4 buildings as well. So this is to scale. This is King Kletso to scale. We'll look at the other 4 buildings all at the same scale and same orientation. So there's Pueblo Bonito, Chetro Ketl. Now Chetro Ketl, I had to do a lot of remapping on it as well. The same thing. There are three published maps that all have conflicting information. Some of it over here, not much. They're pretty commonly the same, minor differences in this area. However, this area, which except for this small portion has not been excavated, there are some major differences in the maps. So I use GPS to map the walls because this area is all, no, it's just a rubble pile. Quite often you think you see a wall when you don't see a wall. So I went back out 3 times, 3 different lighting conditions, and walls that came out the same all 3 times, or 2 out of the 3 times. That's what I ended up with. And that explained why some of the maps were so different. We've got an angle change in the walls here. So depending on which wall alignment you used, it gave you a different map. And Pueblo Alto. And Pueblo Alto is just a single story structure, but quite tall if you've ever been up there. And Pueblo del Arroyo. So that's the 3D in the computer version of what's printed in the visitor center. So to create the model of Pueblo Bonito, I had to go do the same thing I did with Chetro or King Kletso, only for the whole building. My computer couldn't handle the entire photo set for everything, so I did it in sections. This happens to be the southeast corner of Pueblo Bonito. That was the model. That's the textured model with the photos mapped back onto it. All that basically to create this, which is an orthophoto and a digital elevation model with contour data to tell me what the elevations are on the walls. We go from this data to this data. So you can still see the contour data underneath there. The red lines are actually 6-inch contours on the walls. So the person generating the model would be able to actually go through and design the walls as they actually were. And this is also the first map to have the details of the queues inside there. And what's important to note here is this was done with one person. I did it by myself. one person mapped King Quetzal and Pueblo Bonito, which typically that would take a survey crew, and mapping the tops of the walls would be extremely difficult. So I could do it as one person using technology, and even do the tops and bottoms of the doors again for the model, so that could be put into the model where they are in the real world. That's the final model with the portion of Bonito that when threatening rock fell, it fell on top of. And we were able to reconstruct that based on the elevations we had on everything around it and photos prior to it being destroyed. And that's the final model in the visitor center. And you can see another thing they wanted was models of Bonito through time. So that's what we'll look at here, as well as that's where threatening rock took it out. So it's Bonito through time. This is the final footprint of Pueblo Bonito. A little 6-foot scale figure. So that's the early portion of Pueblo Bonito. And this is all data based on the work that we presented in Jill Neitzel's volume on Pueblo Bonito. So if you ever are interested in how this information came about, you can look in there, and we detail it quite well. John Stein was the senior author on that. Stage 2, things change a little bit. It gets a little bit bigger, a little bit taller. What else happens is that first story on stage 1 is actually buried, for lack of a better term. They built out along here, and the new floor level or plaza level is at the top of the first floor. So that first story is now below grade for everything subsequent to stage 1. Stage 3, things get a little odd. These are all foundations that were in Pueblo Bonito, and Judd believed they were built during this time frame, so we didn't have standing walls on top of those, just foundations. And that's kind of what we think it may have looked like, although it obviously, with all that in there, it changed a few times during that time frame. And this is the largest great kiva that was in Pueblo Bonito, and it was completely raised, everything taken out of it and filled in to create what we see in stage 4. And in stage 4, Judd thought this was when that foundation complex off to the east was created. So the distance from the southwest corner to the southeast corner of Pueblo Bonito is the same distance from the southwest corner to the southeast corner of this foundation complex. There's a lot of discussion on whether that was actually created, ever built upon or not, but it's there. It's the exact same length as Bonito, so it obviously has something to do with the overall function of Bonito and its form. In the last stage, really the biggest thing in the last stage is the construction of hillside, which looks like a platform that was put to address threatening rock, which that is one of the names Pueblo Bonito is known by, is the name for threatening rock, or the primary name. So this whole complex may have been to address this feature, this on the cliff threatening rock, which moved back and forth every day, similar to what would happen if someone was breathing. So now we'll look at these through time. So Del Arroyo and Alto don't have structures there yet. We move ahead in time, and this is the same construction stages we used for modeling Pueblo Bonito. So that's kind of an arbitrary cutoff date, but it gives you an idea through time what they look like. And you see in this last 1070 to 1015, a lot of construction going on. Then after 1015, really minor modifications. The biggest thing was the tri-wall behind Del Arroyo. And we can also use this data to compare. So this is Pueblo Bonito. This is one of the BC sites, one of the residential sites across the canyon south of Pueblo Bonito. And that map and 3D model was created from photogrammetric data. So we can look at, again, Bonito. We can see how thick these walls are. These doorways are 3 to 4 feet tall. Now we can look at BC 59 and see the difference there, both in masonry style and thickness, just a complete difference, even though they were in use at the same time. And this is a 3D model created from photogrammetry. Now we'll look at the Kiva complex in Chetro Ketl, the Kiva G complex. So there were eight Kivas in the same general area built in Chetro Ketl through time. The earliest one is built at the lowest portion of this hole you see here, which is also what we see here, just for reference purposes. So the first Kiva to be built, Kiva 5, G5, was this one. The second one was G4. The third was G8. The fourth was G6. The fifth, the sixth, the seventh. The G1, 2, and 3 are literally just, 3 was the biggest one, and 2 and 1 are remodels of that same Kiva, which is what we see right here, or right here. But like the other things, we can then turn this into a 3D model since we've got elevation data for all of these as well as the planimetric data. So there is not the best animation, but it gets the point across. There's the first Kiva. The second Kiva, you can see it's coming up. The third Kiva, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth. And that gives you a better understanding of how this was built. And of course, when a new Kiva came in and intruded on a previous Kiva, that wall, so in this case, the wall where these intersected would be taken out, would be removed. But there's enough of those Kivas left that they were able to determine their size and position. And now we'll look at roads. So we'll begin looking more at roads, the LiDAR data, and also as we go through this, some structure from motion data. The Pueblo Alto fan is a popular one because there's so many roads. So this is in 1934, what the aerial photography looked like. You can see a lot of linear features or roads quite clearly on this. In 2005, this is low sun angle, so it's enhancing the roads. They aren't nearly as obvious. In 2009, again, you can't see them nearly as well. So throughout time, they are gradually disappearing, and that's just due to the forces of nature. You know, sand and dirt blowing across there, vegetation growing up, catching the sand and dirt, and filling in the expression of the roads. However, with LiDAR, this is in 2010, work from the Solstice project, Anna Sofer, she got LiDAR flown. You can see those roads quite clearly. And this is just a quick example. This arrow shows the direction of the sunlight or light, and you can see the roads literally appear and disappear before your eyes. And that's why getting this data into a computer and being able to manipulate the light is really critical to being able to see the roads quite easily. So there's that 2009 aerial photo again. The roads interpreted from the LiDAR data. The LiDAR data with the roads. And down here, this road comes down to this location. This is Chetro Ketl, Pueblo Bonito, Pueblo del Arroyo, and Pueblo Alto. And we'll look more in depth at that location here in a minute. So there's Chetro Ketl, there's Taos unit. Taos unit sits right at the base of this road, and it has some unique features that tell us its actual function was probably more of a road-related function. So it's sitting there to address whatever it needed to do with this road. So this is a 3D model of it, and this is a pillar. There's two other pillars in Chaco, and both those pillars show in association with roads. This is, these are two large rooms. You can see a stairway going into this one. So we've got a stairway going into here. And then behind this, right here, up the cliff, that's where the road meets the top of the cliff. And you can see the remnants of toeholds going up that cliff. Right here we see there are notches cut in the rock where you could have put a wooden slat across there. Then you could put a ladder going up to that slat. Then you've got the toe holds going up the cliff. Or you could put a ladder going up the cliff as well, rooted on that slat. Now we'll go to the north. This is the Great North Road, or in this case, the parallels on the Great North Road. And you can see as it goes across these sand dunes, you can see it quite clearly. It kind of disappears down in the valleys between the sand dunes. However, if you, like Jim Copeland and Peggy Gowdy did with the BLM, go out with a GPS unit, you can mark every sherd you find, pot sherd, on that road. And now you've got a nice continuous line of pot sherds going down that road. And this is south of that location, the alignments again, the parallels, in LiDAR data in 3D with the aerial photo on top, and you can look down the roads and see them quite clearly that way. And there, in that section that I just showed, there's a portion that we could never find this road on the ground. We could see it in the aerial photography and obviously see it in the LiDAR. We always wondered why we couldn't see it on the ground, and this is why. In 20 times vertical exaggeration, it shows up quite clearly. No vertical exaggeration, it doesn't show up so clearly. It's only 3.6 inches deep in the center from edge to center across a 30-foot wide segment of road. So in 30 feet, you cannot see 3.6 inches visually. That's why we could never see it. And this is the Great North Road. This is south of that location, actually south of Pierre's. This little bump you can kind of see right there is Fajada Butte. Pueblo Alto would be right up here. And this is that road, the North Road. And you can see it as it goes across the tops of the dunes. You can also see here where the sheep and the cattle have decided that is a good direction to travel. A large dirt road, maintained dirt road, full-size pickup in the road right here. You can see the margins of the road. That gives you an idea just how large these features are. And now we'll go southwest of Gallup. This is about 80, 90 miles from Chaco. And this is Quinjocho, and it gives you an idea of how it's laid out, the landscape. So you've got the great house, the areola around it, and earthworks around that, the roads where they come into the site, earlier Great Kiva, contemporary Great Kiva, and this road actually goes down to a post-Chacoan site. It's not contemporary with this site, but it has a road linking it. Now we'll look at it in LiDAR. You can see this road pretty clearly, this one quite clearly. You can't see this one at all. So if we change the sunlight again, exact same position, just different sunlight, you can see this road now quite clearly, and you can see this road. You can see what looks like a road coming out here. Again, that sunlight just helps a lot, and you can see the Great Kiva quite clearly as well, and the early Great Kiva. Now we'll look at the Gasco Herradura and the Gasco Road. So these arrows are showing the road. Sometimes an aerial view helps. You can actually see a concentration of, this is material, vegetative material from, you know, the trees have dropped off. In this case, this is sand and clay fill in the bottom of the road. You can see the road curves here, right by the Herradura, which is right here. Probweiner is right here. The road being going right through here. And going back the other way, we can see again where that road is without the arrows to distract us. However, this gives you a view of the world, and also sometimes these are much easier to see from the ground perspective, and there is the road right there. You can see the swale quite clearly. Now we'll go north. This is to the Holmes Group, which if you've seen any of the images from this when the Archaeological Conservancy was trying to purchase it, you've seen the LiDAR. This is the map of it. When they mapped it, they weren't too sure that this went all the way around. If we look at aerial photography, this aerial photography, you can actually see the road quite well. In the LiDAR, you can see it really well as this road coming in from the side that goes all the way down here. If we look at the 34 imagery, again, you can see the road clearly. It's a continuous feature around this. And I think that's a pretty good example of a road that's not straight. This is Morris 41, just south of the Holmes Group. As you saw here, no roads in this map. No roads here, but if we go to the LiDAR data, you can see this feature, which is a Chacoan road going off here. This feature, which we weren't sure if it was or wasn't, so we looked at 30 aerial photography, and sure enough, there is that feature, because right here is a gravel, or in the image was a gravel quarry, but you can see it comes around and comes back in to the site. So that's another road, again, not too straight. Now we'll go look at a site near cornfields in Arizona. So there is the Chacoan Road, another of those circular roads like we have at Holmes Group. And this is structure from motion LiDAR that was, or not LiDAR, photogrammetry, a digital surface model created last summer. And there's a full-size pickup there for scale, a Jeep Wrangler, and a house. So this road is 17 meters across, pretty big, and there's the Great House. We'll go north now to Aztec. So this is the Aztec Airport Road, photo taken in 1919. You can see what the road looked like then. It's white, some sort of surface treatment on that road. This is what it looks like in 2009. You can't hardly see the road unless you know where it is. In 35, that's what it looked like. We can still see a bit of surface treatment on the road. But with LiDAR in 2007, we can clearly see the berms on the edge of the road. And this is Aztec West Ruins. This is the road going past Aztec North. You really can't see it there. You can sort of see it in the 50s. This is 1950s aerial photography. In the 30s, you can see it pretty well. However, with LiDAR data, we can see it quite well. And again, we can interact with it. We can move it down, and we can see how the road goes past that Great House. Now we'll go down to Dittert, which is south of the El Malpais. And that is the site right here, the Great House. You can see this road coming up here, another road coming up past this site, another road coming up to this one, another road coming across, going over to the Great Kiva, which is about 1 kilometer away. So you can see how the LiDAR really makes a difference. And just like Kinhocho, you have this kind of areola around it with earthworks. Now we'll go to Chambers, Arizona. This is what, about 130 miles from Chaco. There we've got what they've been interpreted as parallel roads, but it may actually be one road with the spoils from the road being piled, creating that second line. But it's the case of where we've got a Chaco period structure going with roads going to a post-Chaco period and actually going to a spring. Taylor Spring compound is a P3 site, as well as it's going right to that spring that's there. That's what the site looks like. Rob Weiner standing on top there gives you an idea of scale. This rubble mound is that building, is the Chambers Great House. This is what it looks like in structure from motion surface model. So you can see the Great House, you can see the roads, building, a different way of looking at same data. You can see the Great House, the area all around it, all the earthworks, the roads coming out. And we can look at this road, I'm standing right here looking back toward the Great House, back this way. This gives you an idea of scale. There is the road, and there's Rob standing in the center of the road. That gives you a real good idea of the scale of this road. It's again about 18 meters wide and almost 2 meters deep. We'll go north now to Goodman Point. This is an example of LiDAR data unfiltered, so that idea of looking through trees, this shows you what Goodman Point looks like with all the trees there. You can see some things. This is a great kiva here. You can see these are some smaller sites, and you can see this road coming across. If we remove the trees or filter the trees out, now we can see a lot more. We can see all these roads, as well as the lake site at Goodman Point, the big P3 complex, all these other structures. You can clearly see the Great Kiva, and then now you can look at it without that. So you can see that LiDAR has a huge advantage in looking through trees, seeing what's underneath the trees. Now we'll go to Lowry, which is even farther to the northwest. And that's what it looks like today. The Great Kiva, the Great House, the parking lot, if you've been there. What's interesting is this Great Kiva is actually the vaults, the features inside the Great Kiva have been interpreted as, and look, I think it's a perfectly valid interpretation as symbols of the winter and summer people. Now we go back, now we'll look at this in LiDAR. So there's the Great Kiva in LiDAR. There's the Great House. Now we'll pull back away from that. And this is a Chaco road going around. You can see all these structures here. This is a Chaco road. You can see it coming across. This is a field. It's still visible in that field. If we change the sun angle again, then we can see some of the roads more clearly. This road happens to be right on what the summer solstice sunset should be at that location. And it also happens to bisect the Great Kiva, which would be that division between winter and summer. This is Lowry without the trees filtered, Lowry with the trees filtered. Now we'll look at up in Mesa Verde, the Farview complex. This is Farview House, Pipe Shrine House, Farview House. Looking from here up, this is a Chaco road that comes down and actually comes from Mummy Lake down and around Farview House. And then there's a road that comes out of Pipe Shrine, goes on down Canyon, or down the mesa top, and this is that road. It's about 4.5 miles of contiguous road. Again, back to, there's Farview, Pipe Shrine, Mummy Lake. If we look at the LiDAR data now without the vegetation, this is what we see, and we can see this large rectangular road that encircles all the sites here, as well as a road here, and then the road that comes out of Pipe Shrine coming down this way, comes on down, curves, and you can see that road coming down. And this is only about 1.5 miles of this 4-mile road, 4.5-mile road. And since this is 3D data, we can do cross sections across it. So this is right at this location. This is the modern road, what it looks like. This is the Chaco road, what it looks like. You can see it's actually larger than the modern road and more visible than the modern road. So if we were to take a section of that road and calculate the cut in that, we get about 550 cubic meters or 700 cubic yards. So if we extrapolate that to the entire length of the road, divide by 2 for sections where it's not as prevalent as this, although there are areas where it's more prevalent, we get an estimated 17,000 cubic yards of excavation along that road to give you an idea how much was moved. This is the 3rd largest production dozer in the world. It carries that blade, the push on it is 45 cubic yards, and it's about half the width of this road. So that gives you an idea of how much material was moved to construct this road. And again, vegetation on, a lot of vegetation, trees in Mesa Verde, vegetation off. And this gives you an idea of that entire length. The easier to see line is actually the Chaco road. This is the modern road. And now we'll go to Skunk Springs. This is a great house community, pretty significant development. There's what the great house right here looks like. This is an aerial photo. As is common, again, the maps aren't quite accurate. This should match here, but it doesn't. Now we can look at this building. That gives you an idea of the size again. I'm standing in the Great Kiva. This is structure from motion, so drone created data. You can see this road. You can see this road coming up and down. You can see the big Herradura there, which is a road feature. We changed the sun angle. That road goes away. Now we can see this is a full-size pickup sitting there. But we can see this road really clearly. You can see this road clearly. You can see this one clearly as it comes up. You can see this one clearly as it goes down. So that's, again, that value of playing with stuff in the computer, that sun angle. This is the digital elevation model of the Great House. You can actually see these are stones that create the early Great House. So there's an early Great House underneath this later structure. That's a part of that early Great House. And you can actually see the stones there. So this we did at about 3/4 of an inch is the pixel resolution. So I can actually take this data and create a new map of this entire site, not only the Great House, but everything in Skunk Springs, because you can see the walls in the data. And this is merging the two. And these are 3 gentlemen from Navajo Nation Historic Preservation Department. And this is a crumbled house, which is just to the southwest of Skunk Springs. This structure up on top of the mesa here is a post 1150-ish building. And this is a 1000s, 9 to 1000s building right down here at the base. They're occupying virtually the same space here. That's what the digital elevation model looks like. You can see it looks a bit different than the map of it. You can actually see the cell structure here for the walls. And you can see what they call the moat back here. This is about 5 feet deep. The enclosing wall, or the fortification there, some call it. And that this is actually a road back there. Of course, since it's in 3D, now we can look at it. We can move it around and experience it again in 3D instead of a static image. And it's much easier to see this from here than it is. Well, most of this you would not climb on because it's too steep. It's difficult getting up this side. This side is much steeper. But it gives you an idea of how this building is sitting up on this mesa with this big fortification behind it. So you could only get into that if you were allowed to get into it. And now we'll come back to Chaco. This is the canyon, downtown Chaco. We've got Pueblo del Arroyo, Pueblo Bonito, Chetro Ketl, Casa Rinconada, Pueblo Alto, New Alto, East Ruin, the BC sites, BC 59, which you saw the map of, is right here in the 3D model of, and Taos unit right here. So this is just to give you an idea of the overall size of Chaco. The base for the elevation data here is LiDAR data. And then all of these buildings are constructed using GIS, extruding it based on what we think the number of stories, and those number of stories, how tall those stories were. And then creating the 3D model from that, then bringing that into 3D animation software and reconstructing the whole thing. This shows most of the buildings, or not buildings, most of the roads, but not all of them. It also shows Casa Sombrerito, which is no longer in existence. The wash removed it, it eroded away. And here's Pueblo Alto, New Alto. You can see how the roads converge kind of at New Alto and then go down into the canyon, kind of as you can think of it kind of as a road port of entry for that kind of works, where roads are coming in and you do whatever it is you need to do as the road comes in, then it goes on down into the canyon. And for a bit of scale, the parking lot full of cars, that gives you an idea how big everything is. And King Quetzal over here. And that's it. And another structure from motion model. This is the Great Kiva at the Point site just south of Farmington that's being excavated by San Juan College and Linda Wheelbarger. And we can open it up to questions for anybody who's got questions or answers. If somebody's got answers, I'm always open to those.
Thank you, Richard, very much. Appreciate it. I have a quick question. You showed some pictures of the kivas being built on other kivas on top of other kivas, and it looked like there was hollowness underneath some of those massive walls. What's going on there?
Oh, yeah, and that they'd so when they excavated, when you had excavated Chetro Ketl, he wanted to be able to show those kivas how deep it was. So he actually just took everything out, and those walls are held up by rail for railroad. So the ore cars they had out there, they used that rail to hold up the walls. So that's why it goes down. So you can see, yeah, that the plaza in Chetro Ketl, the southwest corner of the plaza, is 22 feet above grade. So the original surface was 22 feet below that. So everything you see there is pretty much built up. So once you, I think what he really wanted to show there was that, you know, there's so much, in addition to all these walls that we see on top, there's this whole structure that's underneath the building that was there that's been built up over time.
Okay, great. But when the people built a new kiva, they didn't use the kiva's roof to support the new walls.
No, yeah, typically they'd fill it in, and yeah, the kiva would be filled in, or quite often a chunk of it would be taken out because they needed that space for the new kiva. So they take that whole thing out, and then when they excavated, they just found parts of some of the kivas.
Okay, thank you very much.
Not a question, a statement, Joe McKinney. And Barb, thank you for getting me into this. I'm overwhelmed. And I've had the pleasure of standing on top of that wall, looking straight down through the various kivas. With some really nice people that I wish were still around and could have seen your presentation. Tom Lines.
Oh,
Alden,
yes,
Alden,
Tom, yeah.
Alden Hayes, Jim Judge. I was at the University of New Mexico. I worked with the Chaco Center. And actually, my question was really fantastic, but what I used to lecture in anthropology at the graduate level, my background is I'm an architect. I was a university planner, and my background is an architect and planner. And I took to heart Wijiji. And I would do almost an entire semester on Wijiji. I didn't see Wijiji in your presentation.
No, I haven't taken on Wijiji yet. Yeah. I've hopefully all the big buildings in Chaco one day.
Well, most impressive. On the bookshelves behind me, what you're looking at is on Chaco.
Oh, wow. Wow.
I had a question about the effectiveness of LiDAR to pick up on, say, submerged adobe walls like at Kuaua versus the stone walls out at Chaco. What's the comparison, and can they pick up adobe walls as well?
If the wall left a linear mound, then yeah, you could. But a lot of them are so melted down they don't even leave much of a mound. So probably the best for that might be resistivity. Anything with a high clay content, typically GPR is just horrible at. But resistivity, there might be enough difference between the wall and where everything's melted down that you might be able to see it.
Thank you.
How much chronological time does it take you to collect data for a site, and how much of your people time does it take to analyze it?
Oh boy, yeah, it varies depending on what I'm doing. So if we were to take King Kletso, that took me, well, I ended up doing it 3 times because that was the first one. It's like, that didn't quite work. I got to do it again. So that took me about 6 hours field time. And then working on it in the computer, I'd say just running the data took about 200 hours, I'd guess. And then working on it from there, probably another 50 to 100. So quite a bit, yeah. Some of it now, like say with, out at cornfields or chambers, that data, I process it and I've got a usable product right away. So that's not as bad. LiDAR data, depending on if it's classified or unclassified when you get it, can take longer because you have to go through and classify it. So it varies, but yeah, when you're rebuilding the structures and you're doing photogrammetry of the buildings, it takes quite a while. For Casa Cielo, that the detailed map and data I showed of it, that was 40 minutes of collection time, of flight time. And then It was about 5 hours total processing time. So it varies depending on what it is and how clean the data is. It makes a big difference too, because some of it will go by really fast in the processing if you've got really nice clean data, or if there's some ambiguity in it, then it gets a little weird and more difficult to process.
Is there a learning curve associated with this? First ones were slow, and the later ones are quicker.
Yeah, definitely. The first ones you make mistakes and you begin to learn what works and what doesn't. With the photogrammetric data, one thing you learn real quick is you don't, like if you're trying to do a kiva, you don't stand in the middle and turn around in a circle. That just won't work. Because the way it works is it's tracking the motion of the camera, so the camera needs to move. So if you stand on the edge and go around, it works real well. Or if you're inside, like the one for the point site, I did that inside. I was standing inside, I went around inside, then I stood up on the edge and went around the outside on the edge so I could get the edge too, and that worked out really well. But yeah. So you learn to keep your camera moving if you're doing manual photogrammetry. For the LiDAR or for the drone photogrammetry, it's pretty simple. Theoretically, there's software that can control it to where you can set your overlap and your side lap, and you're pretty assured of getting what you wanted unless something goes wrong with the storage of the data at some point.
Yes, I just never had any idea how wide the roads were and how deep they were and how much earth had to be moved. Do you have any idea about what they were actually used for? I mean, obviously it wasn't just transportation of goods from one place to another. I mean, it sounds like almost a ceremonial or a parade type of route.
Yeah. The roads that have been cross-sectioned, excavated, and then Fred Niles was the person who did the soil analysis on them, and he found very little platey structure underneath the roads, which in clay-rich roads, platey structure or clay-rich ground will tell you how much something's been used and how deep that structure goes. So it's kind of an alignment of the platelets of clay in that structure in the sediments, and it was less than an inch and a half for the roads. So it looks like they weren't used much for that sort of thing. He felt that could be accounted for just in the construction of the roads itself. So you don't find campsites along them. You don't find a lot of indication of what we would think of as typical use. So they're probably more a connection of place and like you're saying, maybe for processions, that sort of thing at specific times. But yeah, kind of like the great houses, they're massive. They're at scales beyond what they need to be. So that's typical on any sort of ritual architecture. You see the same thing with the roads in with the Hope well, they had a lot of roads, really big, massive. A lot of the Mayan roads, they're much bigger than what they need to be. So a lot of it is that iconic value of what it is, and sometimes I think it's what it's linking to. What they're linking may cause it to be a bigger road.
Also, on one of your very first slides, you showed the inside of a kiva. I'm not sure which one it was, but it looked like there was a groove or a tunnel that may have been under the floor. It seemed to slope from where the staircase ended. It was quite deep, and then it kind of sloped up to the middle. What was that structure?
That was a hidden entryway into the kiva. That's in Casa Rinconada, and there's a stairway behind and below the stairway that you see there. And years ago, you actually used to be able to climb down in it. You can't anymore, but it was. My kids loved it. That was really cool for them. But yeah, so there was a hidden entryway, and there's 2 or 3 other kivas. I'm trying to think in Chaco that have sort of hidden entryways as well. There's one out in front of Kiva A, which is the big great kiva in the center of Bonito. The kiva just south of that had a hidden entryway in it. one of the elevated kivas did, and I think there's one other that had hidden entryways.
Was there any reason that they would get rid of a really giant kiva and replace it with something else? Because in your pictures of Chaco, the progression through time, there was an enormous kiva. And then in the next picture, that kiva was gone. It looked like it was just a plaza there. And
Yeah.
that seemed odd that they go to all the trouble of building such a huge structure.
Yeah, that's a unique kiva. It was Roberts when was it when Judd? Yeah, when Judd was excavating, Roberts, he actually trenched that. He trenched the plaza and he found that kiva. And not only was, most of the other kivas, the walls were only, the masonry in the walls were only removed when another feature intruded on it and they had to take that out. In the case of that kiva, it looked like they took all of the masonry out of that kiva, and then they filled it with a very homogeneous, fairly clay-rich material. So it looks like it was intentionally, for some reason, completely deconstructed and filled in. I'm sure we could figure out 1,000 different why that might be, but a good theory might be that whatever was associated with that kiva, it ended up either that whatever it was no longer valuable, or it was deemed to be either too powerful or power of the wrong type, and we aren't going to use that kiva anymore. It's going away. That's the best plausible answer I have. I'm sure there's 30 others that are just as plausible, though.
Thank you.
Was the material from the road just moved to the side of the road? Oh.
In some instances, it looks like it was just moved off to the side. In others, we're not sure where it went. It doesn't really, there's no real high spot on the edge to let you know. Now, in the case of the Chambers Road, it looks like most of the material was moved off to the east side of that road, which in essence kind of creates this upper lower relationship or positive negative. So you've got this linear feature that's high and this other linear feature that's low. So and you do see where roads come into a site, it might come in on the east side of the site and leave on the west side of the site, a north-south road. So you get some sort of reflexiveness going on with the road. So that may be it. Yeah, but in some cases, I don't know where the material went. They may have leveled it out somewhat when they moved it off to the side, so you just can't see that where it went, no piles of it.
Richard, really interesting, and that so much has occurred in the last 50 years. I remember the Vivians, and what we were working with was Kugel and Poole aerial photos and doing stereo pairs. And I actually got to the point that I could cross my eyes and read the stereo pairs. And I'm sure you've been there too before. But really, gosh, just so much. I'm really overwhelmed. But I do have a question. Back in the day, there was some concern that the weather rail portion at Pueblo Bonito was removed. And then they had second thoughts. Some in the Park Service had second thoughts about, well, maybe we should have left it for interpretation. In your doing your work, did you do anything about what had been there by the weather rails, the trading post? And
not a lot, because they pretty much bulldozed that down. Now I've looked at trying to in the maps, in the 30s maps, there's actually mapped on that, so we know where they were. But I do know, I know where some of the material from it went. So some of it is over just south of, as you're going into Bonito, in what would have been, they call the Wetherell Dam Reservoir, whatever. They put it out in there. So there's a bunch of stuff from the trading post out in there. I would imagine most of it went in the wash, but yeah, you find bits and pieces of it all over that area. So yeah, I kind of, well, number one, it'd be cool to see, but it would also have been nice if they'd have left it so that the entire landscape didn't get moved around even more to where it makes it even harder to find stuff.
I'm just amazed at what you did.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's a bit of, some would call it an obsession. It's probably more insanity.
Is it in book form yet?
Portions of it are, but not all. Yeah. There was some of the LiDAR stuff is in an article from what Journal of Archaeological Research, or the technical one, and then most recently just came out in the landscapes volume for Chaco landscapes, and then of course the Bonito stuff is in Joel Neitzel's volume, and then the architecture volume by Steve Lexon has a bunch of the other stuff that we did in the core there, as well as the amphitheater and some other things in the core that I didn't talk about.
Thank you very much, Richard. I'd like to let everybody know that's here. We are planning a fundraising trip to Chaco, and it'll be in September, starting the 14th through the 17th, and it's an overnight camping trip. So if you know of anyone, I have an astronomer, a photographer, and the food all lined up, but I need an archaeologist and someone to take us on some of the hikes. Taking into consideration, most of us are over 60 and may not be great hikers and climbers, but we'd like to see as much as we can. So if you have any ideas, let me know. I'm it's president at FCHS.
Oh yeah,
So
let me know what dates are, and if they work out, it'd be fun just to go have fun, if nothing else.
oh, we would absolutely love to have you. You could be our archaeologist. We'd love it. And you can stay for free and eat for free.
That'd be great. Yeah. Another reason to go to Chaco is always, you'd think I'd been there enough, but.
Oh, no. It's not possible to go there enough, I think.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah. All right, Barb, anything else?
No. Oh, Richard, thank you so much. This was like awesome. Amazing.
Thank you.
Utterly awesome.
Yeah.
And we do have a chat from Bibi who says, I'm just blown away. I had no idea, how massive Chaco is. Thanks, great presentation. Chaco the movie.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Well, thank you. Yeah, it's that's been one of my. I've seen how big it is, and this is kind of the only way I can convey it that I know of, and it seems to work.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you
again. Thanks a lot.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.